Ladies and gentlemen, just before we get into this episode of the Fitzness Podcast, just a quick reminder that we are also on Spotify and Anchor. So if you want to listen to this episode uninterrupted while you're in a car journey or you're trying to do something around the house, then please do head over to both of those pages and check us out there. On with the episode.
Don't be afraid of failure. Failure is what will create your foundations to becoming fantastic. You'll learn from them, you'll get better from them. And if people tell you that you can't do certain things, show them that you can, because there's no news unless you've given it a try.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Fitzness Podcast, episode number 45 now. I'm really honoured to have Meg Sylvester-Cielen on the podcast. It's a long battle name, I had to make sure I got it cleared with Meg before I started, because that's one of my biggest fears. Meg, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. So, a little bit of a brief introduction, because we'll let Meg get on straight away. IFBB Pro in the figure division. Not too bad. It's all right. Yep, she's doing all right. Obviously, a coach trying to help as many people as she can as well with both their fitness and their figure goals as well, which is awesome to see. Really prevalent on social media. So please do check her out in the description as well. It's awesome, as well as obviously stuff like YouTube, which I'm a big fan of, where she explains what life is like as a bodybuilder. So that's a very brief introduction. That's very serious. But on to the more immature side of Jane Fitzgerald and this podcast. A little bit of an icebreaker question, Megan. I try to create as creative as possible as I can with these. So as a bodybuilder, it's quite a strict regimen and a quick, straight routine. But if you were to only do one exercise and eat one food for the rest of your bodybuilding career, what would it be?
Does it have to be a meal or just an actual piece of food?
Ooh, I'll give you a bit of freedom. I'll say a meal.
Okay.
I'll say a meal.
A meal would definitely be chicken, avocado, some kind of veggies with some bread. I'm a big bread eater. Okay. It digests so well for me. It has to be sourdough though. Okay. So at least that's an actual specific. So that's definitely the meal. When it comes to an exercise, an RDL.
I love it.
Definitely an RDL.
Hinger, I'm definitely a better sort of hinger than I am squatter as well. So definitely RDL for me is up there as well. That's awesome. Awesome response. So again, back onto the serious stuff. Gosh. So obviously that was a very brief introduction. Meg, if you wouldn't mind just telling the audience your storyline or your story in general, maybe before the pro card, after the pro card, until today, how you got into coaching, and social media in general. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I've always been into sport. I was a diver for Great Britain.
Oh wow!
From
didn't know that.
from the age of 8 all the way up to 22 is when we call it retired, but I quit. Managed to go to Europeans, Worlds, Olympic level. I was European champion a couple of times, came fourth in the world. So I've always come from a quite sporty, competitive background. When I finished diving, because I'd injured my shoulder a few times to the point where it was okay, but I couldn't really dive from 10 metre anymore, because every time I did it would come out. So
not what you want.
No, it's not. And I didn't want to do the other side of it, which is the springboard diving, just because I wasn't going to be very good, because I'm not a very heavy person. So I decided to come away from it. I went to the gym, and the person who ran it said to me, "Oh, you'd be really good as a bodybuilder, you should try it." So that's kind of how bodybuilding came about. And literally 6 months later, I actually did a competition. So it was literally straight into a competition prep and getting into the nitty gritty. When we were diving, social media wasn't really a thing. It was, but it was more like MySpace and Facebook, just to be able to connect with other competitors, really, not to be able to push yourself as an athlete or for anything like that. Whereas if I look at the divers now, the ones that are still doing it that I used to, it is very much like bodybuilding, in that people are putting things out there that's quite informative, etc. So it's quite nice to see that. So I basically started my social media when I first started competing, and just started sharing my views on bodybuilding, what I was doing at the time, etc. And through obviously doing well, that's what brought more people to the page, that then generated a little bit more kind of interest, etc. And it's kind of just grown naturally through that. So I was a bikini competitor. I always wanted to be a figure competitor, but I was told by my first coach that I probably would be a better bikini competitor than a figure competitor. So that's why I went down the route of that. Ended up being in a relationship with Cuba at the back end of 2017 into 2018. And naturally, obviously, because of that, he became my coach. Because it made sense to me that my views aligned with what his did. The coach that I was with at the time, it was very different, so it was very conflicting. So instead of creating that stress, I didn't finish on bad terms. Just obviously explained that because Cuba was my boyfriend at the time, that we would progress on to that.
Killing two birds with one stone. Great relationship and coach at the same time. Love it.
Yeah. And you know what? Not many people could probably do the two. Because
true. Yeah.
I know a lot of people who have either been coached by myself and Cuba that are both in a relationship together, but obviously also coach and can't coach each other. You have to have a specific, what's the word I'm looking for? I think you have to have a specific relationship, and you also have to have real respect for that other person to be able to have the ability to be able to have the both. But 2018 is when we started coaching together, and that was the year that I actually won my pro card in the bikini class. And then off the back of that is when I decided to transition to figure, just because my love for training and the way that I love to train just wasn't going to be fitting for a bikini class.
Yeah. That's an awesome sort of story, because I think it's incredible to see how professional athletes, if they have to retire, unfortunately, where they go down in terms of their next routes as a sportsman or sportswoman.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people might go into the private sector in terms of, I don't know, maybe like financial management, a random example, but then other people want to still stay in sports.
Yeah.
Was it, which is awesome, because obviously I didn't quite know that. And then that's what the beauty of the podcast, you come on and you learn the most amazing stories of people. Was it, do you reckon, was it due to the fact that obviously divers have to be, as myself as a strength and conditioning coach, obviously studying here at Loughborough University, you learn all about like the needs and the analysis of the athletes, and obviously myself doing it very, very quickly. Divers, incredibly strong, incredibly mobile, you know, all those things where you can see that transition over to bodybuilding in some sense. You know, do you reckon it was because of that you slotted in quite easily?
Yeah, I think obviously from your aspect of strength and conditioning, things are slightly different now compared to when I was competing diving. Everything was a little bit more plyometric based, rather than strength based, really, but a little bit of mixture of both. So the aesthetic side of things probably tied in quite well, alongside obviously having that base foundation of muscle anyway, and then also the kind of mindset and routine aspect of any person who is obviously from a competitive background or an elite athlete can definitely slot into something a lot easier than probably someone that's never really had that before.
Yeah. I love that last point that you mentioned, because, you know, off the diving board and then off stepping on stage, it's a point I was going to mention a little bit later on, but, you know, that's probably the tough side which people don't see, is the thousands and thousands and thousands of times that you try a dive versus the thousands and thousands of times you go into the gym, which nobody sees, and obviously unless you're prevalent like you are on social media and YouTube and stuff. But, you know, those are the stuff they don't see. They see the competition, either in the Olympic Games, World Champs, European Champs, or stepping on stage at the Arnold. You know, did you have any sort of lapse though when you sort of transitioned over to bodybuilding in terms of that mindset, in regards to, I can maybe a little bit less pressure because you're not having to maybe compete on a performance based, maybe you are with posing, but in that sense?
No, I think it can be a little bit similar in that you have to, you're on your own.
Yeah.
You've got to be up there, you've got to perform, you've got to be ready to go. Obviously very different.
Yeah, very different sports, yeah.
Yeah, diving for me was a lot more nerve-wracking than what bodybuilding is to getting up on stage. But it's the same process, isn't it? You still have to get yourself ready for it. It's just very different. The performance, in my opinion, that's possibly that's probably the worst thing to see. Obviously, the performance on stage is very important, but it's the back work that's super important to be able to get to there. Exactly the same thing with diving, but the most important performance that you do of your life at that point really is that end goal of the dive. So it is the same, but slightly different.
Yeah, I suppose it comes down to, in both sense, actually. I love how this has gone, because obviously we're looking at both the performance and sort of the side of bodybuilding and diving. It's awesome. I didn't have this planned whatsoever, ladies and gents. This is unbelievable. I suppose for elite athletes, because despite what some people may think, I think bodybuilders are elite athletes as well, just in a completely different field, if not harder in certain aspects. I think I've heard it's come down to chasing perfection. And in bodybuilding, I suppose, and in diving, it's quite difficult to fall into a healthy habit of that, because you need to get a dive right. It's a points-based system, and you get to bodybuilding and you're trying to be perfect or trying to be better than the person that's beside you.
Yeah. I think when it comes to both aspects, and when it comes to being an elite athlete, and whichever sport it is that you're in, whether you class a bodybuilder as being an elite athlete or not, the chase of perfection, is that really a really healthy mindset? Probably not, no, but not everybody is destined to be an elite athlete. Not everybody can have that striving for perfection. Otherwise, the world would be a very different place. Yeah. We wouldn't have so many people that aren't employed, etc., etc. So I don't think it's possibly the best mindset to have, especially when you try to apply that to everything in life, because not everything can be perfect. No. You can aim to get things better, but not everything can be perfect, because it's not something that you can have control over. And again, you do have it's a very niche mindset, what a bodybuilder / any other elite athlete does have. And in my opinion, perhaps it's not the most healthiest, but I think that I'd rather put my mind into something like this rather than anything else. Yeah.
How do you conquer that then, or overcome it yourself? I would say maybe when you're both a diver and you still are a bodybuilder. Mm-hmm. So because I'm trying to think about it in my head, because a lot of the things like body dysmorphia, or again, striving for perfection when someone that might be their peak. Yeah. Do you have any specific tactics, maybe for myself even, or for the audience as well, for maybe just trying to focus about in the moment? And yes, perfection is obviously something that you've got to strive for in terms of maybe the sports that you've experienced. Yeah. But have you got any sort of maybe specific techniques that you use?
When it comes to striving, it tends to be that end goal that's obviously the thing that you're striving towards. I think the most important thing is to be in love with the process, regarding of whether that be a bodybuilder, whether that be someone who is an ice hockey player, etc. Instead of having that real focus of, I need to win the match, or I need to do this, I need to look a certain way, I need to be that person, etc. It's falling in love with the process day to day, ticking the boxes day to day, that you have to have that real focus on, rather than that end process or that end goal. Otherwise, you do get into that web of, especially within bodybuilding, comparison, getting in your own mind around what someone else is doing, what you're not doing, and I think that creates a real negative mindset. But when you come to kind of the body dysmorphia, the kind of what I've just said in regards to comparison, over time, you do get better at being able to switch off from things like that, especially when you've done it for such a long time. But it does take time to be able to get there, and that's the only thing that you can say to anyone. It just does take time, and I've been doing this since I was 8, so I'm at a point now where I'm nearly 30, so I can be okay with not having a certain thing at a certain one time. I know that I'm striving each day to be able to create that to happen.
Does a bit of success help with that, do you reckon? So, excuse me, sorry. Does, I don't know, winning a competition or doing well at competition, You know, I think it was, you did really, really well at was it the Arnold Classic?
Yeah, the Arnold, yeah.
Yeah, that was unbelievable to see.
Thank you.
Does a little bit of success or a little bit of, I don't know, maybe like positive feedback help with that as well, do you think?
I like failure. Yeah, I actually, not that I prefer failure. It's very nice to do well.
Yeah.
It's very nice to get people saying nice things, but I like to be able to not do quite so well, to have something to be able to push towards. I think sometimes if you don't enjoy failure, that's when things break down. I think that if you can only accept the winnings, which are all great and definitely a positive reinforcement, then things are moving in the right direction. But unfortunately, you are going to have to deal with failures as well, and you have to be okay with that.
How do you reckon it like from just on a side note, how do you reckon someone like Chris Bumstead deals with, or someone like Ronnie Coleman back in the day, sort of dealt with having to defend their title at Mr. Olympia so many times, one after the other? You know, because like you said, in that sense, the judges obviously see that they're the best in the world, that what they in their division, their respective division. How do you reckon? Because they've not. I suppose maybe Chris is a different scenario, maybe Ronnie a couple of times as well, where they've come second or maybe even third or not even placed. But, you know, they're striving and they're winning. You know, I think Chris is, three time or four time, I think it is. And, yeah, 4 time now. And then Ronnie was at 8 time, I think it was. So how do you reckon that they deal with it, just from your perspective on the inside as a bodybuilder?
I think when it comes to anybody in bodybuilding, yes, you are striving to beat that person that's above you. But at the end of the day, you also can only create something of your own physique. So instead of focusing on what other people are doing and perhaps if this person's going to catch me, it's always that focus on, okay, so what can I get better? I might have won, yes, but perhaps the door is closing. Perhaps there'll be someone that comes along. What is it that I can do to be better? Because there's obviously strengths and weaknesses of everybody. They've got to be able to bring up their weaknesses as well as obviously really showing off their strengths as well. So I think it's that constant pursuit of making sure that you're focusing in on you and what you can do rather than other people. And I think that's the mindset of a champion.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it when in your diving days as well, because I think it was a documentary that Tom Daly made at some point, it must be nearly 10 years ago or something like that, where he was learning like front for like somersault or something along those lines, and he was saying that we need to learn it because the Chinese are learning it, so like we got to do it, so like because they're comparing themselves to the Chinese. So like how do you reckon it must be difficult, because do you reckon it's down to the coaching staff to kind of analyze everyone else, and then it's down to you as the athlete to just step out and perform?
When it comes to something like diving, once someone takes that step to doing a certain dive that not everyone's done, it kind of puts in the mindset to everybody that that's possible. So if that is possible, other people can at least have a go and see if they can obviously achieve that. And at the end of the day, if it's something that they can't do, they need to be able to nail their dive specifically. Because at the end of the day, if somebody was to risk doing something that's a little bit more difficult in terms of a specific dive, if that was to then fail, but someone who was doing a slightly less difficult dive was to absolutely nail it, they would still win. So I think it's that process of still doing the things that you can do and doing it well.
So similar to both of your sports, do you reckon it's a born-to-do trait without being obviously disrespectful to the people who work obviously incredibly hard as well, maybe from a later age? Because I had a friend of mine who competes in bodybuilding and is a coach as well, who put out a post the other day that said that if someone asks me if they should compete, they shouldn't really be competing, because that probably answers their question before they've even asked it.
I think that you have to have a certain... To do well in bodybuilding, you have to have really good genetics, yes. And someone that doesn't have the best of genetics, as much as they're going to train really hard to try and improve their physique, are they still going to be a champion? Probably not, compared to someone who has really superior genetics. Someone who has all right genetics can obviously push towards getting really great, but obviously it's just going to take a little bit more work than what it would for someone who has really superior genetics. But that doesn't mean that people shouldn't compete, and that doesn't mean that people shouldn't do bodybuilding, because at the end of the day, if you love it, you should do it anyway, because it's not always about winning a competition or becoming a pro, because people who don't have the best genetics could also still become really great amateur competitors, really great kind of local competitors. So as much as, yes, you're probably not perhaps going to be Mr. Olympia or win a pro card, doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. And I think it's a really great thing to get into from a lifestyle aspect anyway, because the actual lifestyle basis of bodybuilding, of eating well, training hard, is actually very good for people, obviously, from a health parameter standpoint, especially for people who want to be able to live a little bit longer, actually be strong enough to be able to grow old. I think it's something that people should get into. Obviously, there's lots of negativity around being a bodybuilder and the things that obvious competitive bodybuilders do that aren't the healthiest. But if you're not someone who wants to compete at that level or wants to do that, then you don't have to do that. But it doesn't mean that you don't need to do bodybuilding. And it doesn't mean that bodybuilding's a negative/unhealthy thing to do.
Do you reckon then that the old saying, everyone's got to try things and everyone's got to try it once, actually has some value then?
Yeah, definitely. I think you should set yourself up for a really great competition prep. If you are going to compete, a nice off-season, building up your calories slowly, making sure that your body composition's in a great place, making sure that expenditure's not too high, that you've got great routine, that everything's in place from a financial/schedule perspective to be able to do a competition prep. And then you never know until you've tried it.
Yeah, I was going to say, a lot of people probably have in the back of their mind that they want to try it, and then it's so individual, in my opinion, based on how maybe their upbringing a little bit, maybe what background that they've had in sport. You know, maybe if they're like yourself, who has a background in sport, you know, you never know. You might end up being, being the next, champion, whether that's sort of like Arnold Classic, amateur level, like you mentioned. You never know, I think, until you try it. And I love what you said there, about like people having like those doubts, because I think that's just in life in general. So I think that what you just said there was awesome. And you mentioned routines there. Obviously, like bodybuilding, I think, aside from on stage, is about routines. And I think you mentioned it the other day, and you did a video about it, and I'll leave the little thumbnail in on the screen now. And it was about how to balance bodybuilding with a full-time like work-life balance.
Yeah.
Could you talk us through maybe like a day in the life for yourself, maybe as a coach, and then maybe as a bodybuilder as well? Obviously, again, trying to maybe balance both of those, trying to balance, maybe just being yourself as a bodybuilder. What does like maybe a normal day a week, maybe a prep look like for you?
So I think it's really important for most people in life, especially if they're busy, to have a routine. I think it'd be really silly to think that it just has to be a bodybuilder that has to have a great routine. I think when it comes to life in general, it allows you to have a little bit less stress if you have a place for things, because you're able to do your work at a specific time. You know when you need to go and do your food shop, because everybody has to do that. You know when you need to take the dog on a walk, and then it allows for you to be able to actually have some free time, where if you do want to do something that's social, enjoy family time, etc., you have place to be able to do that, rather than always feeling like you're on the last foot, you're always chasing your tail, and it creates for you to just have a real stressful life all the time. When it comes to being a bodybuilder, much like when I used to dive, everything just has its place of what needs to be done and where. So in the morning, I have my own morning routine where I wake nice and early, make sure that I get a good drink in, hydrate, see to the dogs, start my work around 5:30 so that I can get my check-ins done for my clients prior to, obviously, they go to work, so that if they do need to make any adjustments, whether that be steps or whether that be food, that they can get to them straight away. I work with a lot of people that do not either work at home, PT, etc., so they can't really juggle their lives like someone who is like me, for example. It's like if I had my coach reply to me at 10 o'clock, I could still make the changes because I'm at home able to do that. I have a lot of clients that can't do that, so I have to make sure that I'm replying nice and early. For me, I have my specific times in the day where I eat my meals. If my meal timings get adjusted and changed, it really whacks off my digestion. It really whacks off my appetite. For most people that struggle to be able to build up their food in an off season and actually be able to have a really successful off season, it just puts them on a bit of a back burner because it really does affect their appetite, and then it brings their off season to a real halt. Then in the afternoon, it's either a little bit of work / education, because we like to both, me and my husband, like to further educate ourselves to make sure that obviously we're learning new things all the time, because I think it's really important. And that or going to training, if it's training day, evening time, more work. Obviously, we have our clients send form clips just to make sure that obviously we can check on their training and make sure that it's actually been doing optimally before obviously winding down and getting ready for bed at around 8 o'clock. So it's a busy day, but we both love it, and it's nice to be able to do it alongside someone who also loves it as well.
That's awesome. I think bodybuilding is probably one of them ones which is probably the most, if not one of the most sort of disciplined sports out there. And that was a point which I've thought about, is sacrifice and balance. A lot of people talk about this in the elite, maybe performance sides, like sort of maybe athletics or whatever it may be, cricket, football, whatever you want to call it. Do you reckon that doesn't apply to bodybuilding because, you know, a lot of, if not all of the hard work is almost done before you actually compete?
Yeah, but if I refer it back to when I was diving, it was very much the same. It's like I wasn't in the contract that I was in with UK Lottery funding. I wasn't allowed to go on specific holidays to specific places like Ibiza. If we were seen to be going to places like that, we would get our funding cut. We obviously had to spend most of our summer holidays at training camps. So I think it's the same for. I mean, I'm sure that each sport has their time, which is kind of downtime where there's not really competitions around. You can have a couple of weeks where you can have a little bit of a relax and chill. But obviously, most elite athletes will still keep an element of training. Nutrition will still be on point, etc. It's exactly the same, really, across bodybuilding. There shouldn't be really any off switch when it comes to elite sport, in my opinion, for any sport. And I think if you speak to anybody who is of high regard within any sport, would probably tell you exactly the same.
That's awesome. That's awesome, because I didn't actually know that about the national lottery, to be fair. I think it's obviously, I think deep down you kind of understand why that's the case.
Yeah, 100%.
But I think obviously it's different, because obviously I think bodybuilding, like you said, requires a certain sort of trait which I don't think a lot of people have, which Meg, you mentioned before, which I think is an awesome insight into bodybuilding. So it is, yeah, definitely. I think go on, Meg. It's all yours. I think it was, from my opinion, from the outside in, you know, obviously, I don't know, like if any of you noticed, obviously I'm clearly not a bodybuilder. I think looking from the outside in, I think there's a different mindset in bodybuilders compared to everyday lives. Even if you're just trying to lose a bit of weight, because I've had friends who have done it and they've said how hard it is, but they continue to do it because they love it. And then whereas I try, you know, obviously whether it's cutting down for I don't know, I play cricket, so cutting down maybe towards a competitive season to try and feel a bit lighter, to try and, I don't know, run between the wickets harder or running harder when I bowl. You know, it's completely different to a bodybuilder, where it's like when you're getting to those end stages and you're seeing those numbers decrease because obviously the weight's cutting less and less and less. I'm such a big admirer of you guys, because, you know, I think you're different human beings, I think.
Everybody likes to say we're a different breed, but we are. I think it takes. It's a rare. More people do it now, and it is definitely a more popular sport compared to when I first started. And then obviously going back 5 years earlier than that, when my husband started, it was even rarer to find people that obviously did it. But not everybody stays in it, because it is very difficult. It is very hard. There isn't really an off switch within it. So I think that, it's hard to come by people that would probably have the mindset to be able to do it.
Yeah, I'm like I said, I'm a big admirer of that and I've learned a lot actually from bodybuilders, believe it or not. I'll be honest, and even if it's just day-to-day routines, it's unbelievable. So going on to maybe keeping on with the bodybuilding side, I think we'll park the diving for the moment. No disrespect.
No, it's fine.
So have you noticed as a female bodybuilder, a little bit more challenges than maybe sort of some males, who compete as well? Because I think when Generation Iron did, I think it was the second or third documentary, they were talking about female bodybuilding being banned in certain places, and now it's starting up again. And no apologies for the disrespect, but I can't remember what her name is. I think she was before bodybuilding got banned, for like the bodybuilding category for women got banned, or finished. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, Iris. Yeah, sorry, Iris, if you're watching, my apologies. It was, it was so eye-opening to see that in today's day and age, or even that was 2 or 3 years ago, is still existent. Can you still see those in something like figure, which is, again, I hate to say it, but that's considered, right, whereas I don't think so. You should be open to doing whatever categories you want, in my opinion.
Obviously bodybuilding over time has got a lot bigger than what it used to be, in terms of each class has just gotten bigger. Even if you look at the bikini class compared to someone who won it in 2005 compared to now is very different. The things that they do are in the backgrounds, like PEDs, etc. Has that process actually changed? Not really, no. From what I know too, from speaking to people from who used to compete 10 years ago to now, if anything, the approaches with things are a little bit smarter. It's just perhaps the training, especially as females, is a little bit different in regards to the fact that lots of females do now train a little bit harder, a little bit smarter, etc. When it comes to getting rid of female bodybuilding, it actually created a little bit of a strange scenario in the bodybuilding world, and I do actually believe that that's the reason why the rest of the classes actually then started to get a little bit more muscular, because the people that obviously used to compete as a female bodybuilder tried to downsize a little and come into women's physique, which then obviously created for there to be the competitiveness between that, and then people that were getting bigger started to win women's physique, and then obviously the same thing started happening where women's physique started to try and downsize a little, come into figure, which then made figure get bigger. Exactly the same process with most of the classes. So getting rid of it probably made it even worse, to be honest.
You look at again, sorry to compare it back to the male section, but you look at the physique competitors nowadays in the male categories. Those physique guys are huge compared to what they were. If you look at, I don't know, someone like Ryan Terry. Ryan Terry's enormous, and like you look at that back in the day compared to when Miss Olympia first started, and you maybe had your figure equivalent or your lifestyle category. They're just enormous. I think it's evolving all the time, isn't it? I suppose based on how people are. Like you look at Chris Bumstead. Chris Bumstead's probably close to going open at some point.
100%.
He's so big.
Everything's just getting bigger and larger and better. And it's not that their health parameters are any different or any better. It's just that things have evolved from a training aspect, food aspect. Just everything is a lot different.
And I think that's what's so impressive as well, because everyone talks about, and we've spoken about it, that strict lifestyle, and then you're having to change a strict lifestyle because something's changed, and you're like, I just want like a normal routine, and just like I can do it each year. We still get the best package we can each year, and we got to change it. But it comes down to obviously evolving, like you just mentioned, which is obviously another big skill, which I think a lot of people, or trait as well, which a lot of people don't have. And you mentioned PEDs there, and obviously, for everyone doesn't know, performance enhancing drugs, which obviously very, very prevalent in the bodybuilding industry. And obviously, I was very respectful and made sure that Meg was okay speaking about this beforehand. And, we spoke about it with Josh Bridgman, because I've had Josh on. Thankfully, it was an awesome episode to film. A bit starstruck as well, I was actually. And he kind of spoke about it a lot, and he does nowadays. And although I think obviously education is important, because I don't know who made the point about it. You can't really stop it, but you can educate people, which I obviously respect, because like, again, I agree. You can't really stop it, can you? It's like crime. You're not going to stop it, but you can try and make it better if you can. So what's your thoughts on it from a holistical point of view in terms of for the sports? Because it's not just bodybuilding. That needs to be a fair comment to make, and I would be disrespecting Meg and the rest of the bodybuilding community if I didn't say that PEDs are prevalent in almost all sports.
Yeah, they are. I think that before moving into bodybuilding, obviously coming from the sport that I was in before, I was very naive into the use of them, people using them outside of season, and then obviously when they come into their competition seasons, obviously getting rid of them so that blood work / urine tests, etc., aren't affected. So I was my eyes were opened, obviously, prior to when I actually stepped into becoming a bodybuilder. When it comes to someone who is a lifestyle bodybuilder and doesn't have the idea of wanting to compete, I think that the worst thing that they can do is go down the route of using PEDs. It does affect your hormone panel. It will, over time, stop your own hormone panel from working effectively. So if you're someone who is getting help from Bob down at the gym that tells you that you need to take X, Y, and Z things, do not listen to him. I was also very eye-opened speaking to other people in the community of the amount of females that do not compete, that are going on holiday to Ibiza, etc., that start to utilise things like that. Wow. I just think from the aspect of health and the viewpoint that obviously people have such a negative opinion on it, I don't think that it's a healthy thing. I think that if you are someone who is a bodybuilder, you're going down the route of choosing that, it's because you're doing it from a competitive aspect. Literally, if I was to stand on stage as a natural competitor, I'd get laughed at. And I'm not going against anybody. I would not step on stage against anybody, especially in the pro division, that wouldn't be assisted. So from a competitive aspect, it's kind of something that you choose if you are going to go down that route. So I am aware of my choices, and people don't have to agree with that, because it's not something that people need to agree with. It's not something that people need to understand. But if you are someone that's not choosing to be a competitive bodybuilder, don't go down the route of it, because it can risk your own health. And that's not something that you obviously want to do as someone that is as a lifestyle bodybuilder, could we say, or someone that's trying to improve their health and fitness. It's not something that you need to do. You can definitely improve your physique without it. It's just, as a pro bodybuilder, even in the bikini division, you will find that 100% of athletes, especially in the IFBB, and obviously other federations that there are, that's what happens in a bodybuilding competition and environment.
Wow. That insight is incredible, to be fair. I think because we spoke a lot about it with Josh, about maybe not intricate details, but maybe what life was like while enhanced. And I think that's one thing I probably regret about that podcast, was that we didn't actually dive into how that affects someone from a mental point of view, seeing others do it as well, which I thank you so much for your honesty, Meg. It's honestly amazing, and your insights. I'm very aware that I could literally sit here for 3.5 hours, but obviously Meg's extremely busy. So we'll go on to the questions from the public section, which I started doing about 4, 5, maybe 6 episodes ago. Because, like I always mention, I would be extremely upset if I knew that someone I looked up to or someone that I know is going on a podcast and I couldn't answer a question. So, I'm changing the game. It's no longer a surprise, but it's good, because obviously people who want to strive to be like Meg or compete or get their pro card can ask their own questions as well. So the first one, is there things that you do in your day-to-day life related to bodybuilding, I thought it was quite funny, that you hate but you do anyways because you need to progress?
I hate having to eat 6 times a day. I do. But in terms of making progress, and not affecting my digestion, especially with how high my food gets in off season, obviously it's a necessity. But when you are in off season, you just think, oh, it's time to eat again. So that's definitely something that's not the most enjoyable thing day to day as a bodybuilder.
I think I would be great as an off-season bodybuilder because I wouldn't need to.
Honestly, you should try it because it's a lot harder than people think.
Yeah.
Especially because all of it is raw.
Yeah.
Well, if you are someone that's trying to build mass and doing bodybuilding properly, it's all whole foods. It's a lot of that type of food. It's not like you're eating a pizza or a burger.
No, of course not. No. The dirty bulk.
Yeah, it's there's definitely an off-plan meal in there, but it is a lot of volume of foods.
I think just in general, I think I've had my mum cooking for me all the time. Obviously, at uni is a bit different, but when if I was at home, the best off-season, not in season, but off-season bodybuilder ever. I love my training. So obviously training like every day just for my mental state, and then just eating as much as possible. Sign me up. On to the second and final question that we got, because we got quite a few, so I had to limit it down, which is quite difficult.
It's okay, I'm not bothered.
So this is amazing stuff. I love it, man. Do certain categories need specific focus on particular areas / muscle groups? And I think from a performance side, it's obviously quite, for myself as an S&C, it's quite easy to see. Yeah, right. The sprinter needs triple extension or like maximum explosiveness at the ankle, knee, the hip, and all that stuff. But what about from a bodybuilder and a bodybuilding perspective, where you're being judged from certain angles, certain lighting, things like that?
Yeah. So I guess as for you as an S&C coach, you'll obviously look at a needs analysis for what a specific athlete would need. But then you'd also break it down into what that individual needs specifically, especially when it comes to volume application.
Muscle fiber types, things like that, yeah.
What does that person need compared to that person, even if they do the same category in athletics? Mm-hmm. Exactly the same as when it comes to bodybuilding, when it comes to specifically female divisions, obviously bikini, figure, women's physique, women's bodybuilding, and then there's also the wellness class as well. Obviously, their training would all be different. Each class would be different, but then each individual would also be slightly different as well, in that does that person actually need to train as much glutes as they need to train hamstrings, or do we need to put more volume into that? So yes, it's very different. When it comes to kind of figure, you are looking at kind of the overall physique, but you don't need massive arms. So it's not that overall density that you really need there. You need a lot of width, but the amount of thickness that you have compared to something like a women's physique competitor and a women's bodybuilding competitor is very different. When you're moving into classes like women's physique, women's bodybuilding, it is more like male bodybuilding training rather than obviously female training. And then obviously when it comes to bikini and wellness, it's pretty much a lot of lower body, not a whole lot of upper body, but some.
And you mentioned a little bit earlier in the episode about maybe not striving for failure, but or close to striving for failure to try and make sure that you're improving all the time. Yeah. How important is feedback and reflection for bodybuilders and maybe yourself personally as well? Because that's huge for me. That's always like one of my most important things as an S&C and as a performer in cricket. But what about for yourself?
Feedback's everything, because communication in life is everything, and that's feedback is your most important tool when it comes to bodybuilding, any elite sport, when it comes to getting the feedback that obviously you need to be able to improve upon. If I'm doing something wrong or there's something that needs to be improved upon, whether that be my daily routine, whether that be the way in which I'm making my meals, whether that be how I'm doing a specific exercise at the gym, I'd expect my coach, so my husband, to call me out on what I'm doing wrong so that I can obviously improve. Exactly the same goes for when I'm working with my clients as well. It's so important that we obviously get that real great communication from the off, so that if they have a problem or if I have something that I need to say, we know that we're saying it in a constructive way, not in a way that's trying to degrade the other person.
Yeah, I think it comes down to being found out because you were too ignorant to actually look and find out where you're going wrong. Because I know for sure that I would rather go up to one of my line managers, because I'm doing internships at the moment. I've not got my first full-time job yet. And I'll say, "What did you think?" rather than them pulling me up and saying, "James, I didn't think that was quite quite good that I think James, I think you could have done this. So I would rather go up to them and actually say what I thought about it rather than them actually calling me out for it, because then they'll probably get I'll gain a bit of respect from that, I think. And I think maybe judges would think that, I suppose, as well. No, if you go up to them and say, oh, Stephen from the IFBB, what did you think about proportionate back to my hamstrings or my glutes, I suppose, no?
Yeah. Every time you do a competition, you always want to ask for your feedback. It's very important that you do get that, for sure. And honestly, you shouldn't have to ask your coach. Your coach should already know the things that are going to be asked and told to be improved upon. So as much as you can ask the question, for sure, your coach should definitely already be telling you anyway.
And this is a point which I've just thought of, because, and we're going to get into it quickly, do you have to take the reflection with a pinch of salt? Because a couple of instances here, I went to a CPD, or continuing professional development, last night at Leeds United, and they were speaking about how they run their academy with their performance side, and they mentioned using sort of in football they use like sort of sticks for change of direction. And then I went into a lecture on Monday, and they said that you should never use those. So I'm like, who do I listen to? Do I listen to the people who are actually doing it, or the people who are telling me that I should do it? So, like, do you have to take? And another one was Ryan Terry. He did one of his preps for his Olympias, and he said something like how he had got a piece of advice saying that he was probably a bit too big and needed to be more conditioned. Then the next year he did that, and they said that it wasn't big enough. And I was like, do you have to take it with a bit of pinch of salt? Do you reckon? And obviously talk to your coach and sort of find out where that feedback fits in best.
You do, yeah, because if you think about it, with bodybuilding, it's very subjective. What one judge may think and feel may be completely different to the next judge that you actually stand in front of. Possibly one of the best feedback that you could get as a bodybuilder, especially if you're a pro, is standing in front of the head judges that do the Olympia, because they're the ones that would be judging you at the best competition in the world. But when it comes to the feedback that you get from judges, you do have to take it with a pinch of salt, because they may be telling you, okay, so you need to get a little bit leaner, etc. But have you actually got the musculature to be able to become leaner, or have you not? Your coach will know that from an individual needs basis a little bit more so than what the judges are, because you're only standing in front of them for 10 minutes. But what you might actually need is either a little bit more muscle, or perhaps there's something that's slightly not right. Perhaps you're a little bit poorly, and that's why things haven't gone so well. So I think it's really important to listen to the feedback, take it on yes, but do take it with that slight pinch of salt.
Awesome. And then, so on to closing notes now, because again, I could speak for hours. So last 2 points before we log off quickly and say goodbye to you guys. One person or a number of people who have inspired you and influenced you in your life, both on and off stage, in and out of bodybuilding, maybe.
My parents are a huge influence on me as a person, because they're fantastic. They've always had a really great routine, so I've been brought up with that even when I was a little girl. They've got great communication and have always criticised me in a very constructive way. So I think
in a loving way, as parents do, doesn't it? It's a loving way that parents do.
Yeah, and they were never pushy parents. So I think that they just created for me to become a great person. My husband's a real great role model for me for how great he is as a coach, as an athlete, especially at the sport that we both obviously are so passionate about. And then we have there's definitely a few others, a few competitors that I could probably reel off about 10 that inspire me in so many different ways. But one of the main ones, we actually get sponsored by Trained by JP, and the lady who actually is the partner of JP is possibly one of my biggest inspirations, just from the way that she is as a person, her mindset, her approach to life. I just think she's phenomenal. So she's a real big inspiration and always has been. That's
awesome. And obviously, guys, I'll leave everyone's links in the description. So please check them out and show them some love based on that. Because they deserve it after being highlighted as an inspiration, which is good. So final point here for you, Meg. One piece of advice, this is my favourite point, by the way, one piece of advice that you would give to anyone who wants to be the next Meg Sylvester. The last name, I've got it again. I've done it again.
Got Cielen.
There we go. Sorry, my apologies, Meg. I cleared it up as well before as well. I'm sorry.
It's hard because it's
I've got to try. I tried my best. I'm so sorry, Meg.
It was good.
Meg Sylvester-Cielen. Got it.
Thank
Done.
you.
Anyone who wants to be the next Meg Sylvester-Cielen, or anyone who wants to become an IFBB Pro, or anyone who wants to help people achieve their goals and dreams as a coach as well.
Don't be afraid of failure. Failure is what will create your foundations to becoming fantastic. You'll learn from them, you'll get better from them. And if people tell you that you can't do certain things, show them that you can, because there's no no's unless you've given it a try.
That's an awesome piece of advice. What a way to finish as well. Gosh, that was an awesome piece of advice. Meg, honestly, a huge thank you for coming on. It was very, very short turnaround, so I really, really appreciate your time. Obviously, you're extremely busy, so thank you so much. And everyone, obviously, show some love in the description below, subscribing to the YouTube, and hopefully, fingers crossed, when Meg's got that #1 spot at the top of Mr. Olympia stage, we will have her on again and see how things have changed and how they've got better. So thanks so very much again, Meg.
Thank you.
No worries at all.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was such a good episode to film. I honestly wanted to get another bodybuilder on. It doesn't obviously have to be an IFBB Pro or a Pro Card bodybuilder specifically, but I think the fact that Meg's at the top of her game at the moment, or striving to get to that top level as an IFBB Pro, it was awesome to see her honesty and to hear her honesty and her thoughts about what life is actually truly like as a bodybuilder. I think everyone sees the glitz and the glam nowadays of standing on stage and looking a certain way, but the reality is probably far from that, from what people see and what actually goes into life as a professional bodybuilder day to day is probably what makes people so unbelievable. I could name 1,000 bodybuilders who do 1,000 different things to make them as great as they are, but it's so different. And Meg highlighted that for sure. And the way that she goes about it, and her discipline, and her goals to try and help as many people as possible is probably what inspired me to have her on. Her social media platforms, the YouTube, the advice she gives, the openness she gives with her advice based on what she's been through and how she pushes that out is what's so amazing. And Meg, if you're listening, thank you so much for your openness, your honesty, your efforts to answer each question into exact detail that you wanted to was unbelievable as well. And thank you guys for giving those questions in, because when we finished recording, Meg highlighted that she loved the Q&A section, so it's definitely something we're going to keep doing and continuing, because obviously messages get lost, people don't get all their don't get all their questions answered, so it's awesome to see that it's actually benefiting people and the guests actually loving it as well. So please do keep them coming in. Look out for the stories, consider following so you don't miss them out, and hopefully the next couple of guests that we have lined up are just as good. And please do, if you think this episode helps you with your journey, your mindset, your thoughts, please consider sharing it, liking, subscribing. It helps us out a hell of a lot, and it helps help the people that we have on as well strive and continue what they're doing best in their lives. So thank you very much, guys, once again, and look forward to another episode of the Fitzness Podcast next Wednesday at 6 p.m. Take care.